All right, we are live. Welcome in, everybody. We got Seth over here. How's it going, Seth?
What's up?
All right, so obviously this is a new segment called That Gecks Out. We kind of got thrown on the fire last time. I didn't want to cancel on Angel again, so we went ahead and launched this one a little prematurely. Uh, it was funny. It was called That Checks Out, and then when the show was over, Angel actually got a hold of me, kind of on the side, reminding like, "Hey, you dropped the ball on the name." Well, I wasn't really ready to launch the new show yet, so the name wasn't all that important to me. That checks out is just something I say a lot, but that Gecks Out kind of works out a lot better. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about gut loading insects. It's going to be 20 to 45 minutes of an episode. Seth was, humble enough to join us over here and talk. What do you got going on over there, man?
Just getting the day started at the shop, man. The kids are on spring break this week. Well, the wife and the kids are on spring break, so having a little bit later starts to my mornings just because it's a little harder to get out of bed whenever it's not time to get everybody to school. But
I got you.
yeah, just about to get started with my day here after I get off here with you and start taking care of feeders. Actually, that's what I've been doing so far is cleaning up tubs and just kind of getting things. I'm about to move a colony around of dubia roaches and get those all hemmed up and
I
just
got
doing
you.
the usual.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah. We actually do our spring break next week. Saturday morning, I'm actually from Columbia, Missouri. I'm driving out to Arizona. I'll be out there for about a week. Kind of worried because
Nice.
we're in the middle of breeding season. I'm pulling, 5 to 10 eggs a day, and I guess I'm kind of
You're
lucky
driving.
because
You're driving all the way from Missouri
yeah,
to
I'm driving
Arizona.
there and driving back. Um,
Is San Antonio on the way?
no,
Probably not,
no,
huh?
that's a little too south. But
Yeah.
we what do you call it? I got Krista from Neurophi in town. She's actually going to be popping over tomorrow to go over all my
Cool.
stuff, and she's going to help me out while I'm gone. So
Sweet.
pretty excited about that. Plus, I get to go out there and see my family, which is huge.
Hell yeah.
Um, well, getting into it, man. You had a lot of information about gut loading you wanted to go over. I know I got a little bit of information I wanted to go over. So that being said, let's tell everybody what gut loading is, bro.
Yeah, man. One of the main things that I focus on at the expos whenever I'm meeting people all day, whether they're brand new to reptiles or whether they have a gecko, or especially if they say they have a gecko, I kind of do a little pop quiz on them
Mm,
just to kind of make sure that their gecko has everything they need because you don't know if they got that gecko a month ago or a year ago or 10 years ago. But
okay.
a lot of people are missing certain aspects of taking care of geckos just because it's not educated enough. And so that's kind of where I feel like I come in being playing that role at the expo to kind of make sure that everybody's educated on gut loading and supplementation.
Yeah.
That way, whether they get a gecko from me or they get a gecko from somebody else, or they don't get a gecko at all and they already had a gecko,
Yeah.
it just adds a little bit of knowledge to their situation. Because like I tell all the kids, I'm like, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of like at least gets them open to the idea of listening to what I have to say. So yeah, I always just tell people like the definition of gut loading. First of all, it's the process of packing nutritional ingredients into your feeders before you feed your feeders to your geckos or
Yep.
whatever uh, insectivorous reptile that you're feeding.
Absolutely. It, it,
Um,
it does. It maximizes the nutritional value that you can give to your animals, and you can change it up. If you feel like they're not
yep,
getting a certain amount of whatever, you can't force, vitamin A down the throat of a gecko, so,
yep,
and that's what I keep. So that's why I'll always bring up that aspect of it. But you can give it to their food, and their food's going to tear it up.
right.
And then once it's in there, now there's a little bit of a controversial topic, and I'm wondering if you know anything about it. They say that you should feed off. Obviously, you got your 24 to 48 hour period of gut loading, and when that's
Hmm.
done, they want you to feed off all of those insects uh, immediately. Uh,
Mm,
I kind of feel like you can store them, but what do you think?
I don't have any like my process is basically I have insects that are constantly gut loaded and ready for use.
Okay.
And those insects, some of them are only gut loaded once and then fed off. Some of them end up not getting grabbed in a certain feeding and end up getting gut loaded again or again or again.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen any major issues other than potentially there could be some shock issues, especially in like a more sensitive feeder like a cricket, where if they're on a certain diet for a long time and then they go straight to a vastly different diet, maybe there could be some shock issues and have some fatality there.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see any reason for it to be like a big deal to feed them off right away after. I mean, other than the fact that you already put the effort and the money into the bugs by gut loading them and letting them consume the things that you're purchasing to do this with. As far as the bugs and the reptiles go, I don't see a big harm in them existing for another gut load. Is that did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny you bring up crickets. I've never been one that can keep crickets alive. And recently, something came across that said, "Hey, it's the temp in the room." But it's interesting to hear you say that it's potentially that they've been eating some other stuff, and now I'm gut loading them. So
Uh,
maybe I'm shocking them.
with with crickets, the most common thing is first of all stress in shipment. I've recently started getting crickets from a local place like in Houston, which is only a few hours away,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually farmed there, and so they're hand delivered to me in a van by the people that breed them.
Okay.
And so they never get on an airplane and experience that change in pressure that anything you get shipped or most things you get shipped are going to experience. So that's a big benefit there. I'm starting off on the less stressed animal right out the gate. And then beyond that, it's really important to not only keep them fed with chow, but really important to keep them hydrated with fresh hydration at all times. Like what I try to do is
Okay.
put them just enough. I always tell people less is more. I want to put them just enough fresh veggies for them to eat in about a 24-hour period, but not so much that there's a lot left over afterwards, because then that can create a hazardous
Yeah.
condition for the insects where there's mold starting to fester and things like that. Or it also, if you put just enough, it eliminates you having to go and pull out the old veggies um,
Mm-hmm.
to replace. You just go and put fresh. Once you get that amount figured out,
Okay.
and that's going to be different depending on what you're feeding and how many bugs you're keeping and all that. So that's just trial and error in each different
Yeah.
situation. Uh,
Now, do you also
but
keep mealworms? Obviously, you have to keep those for your Leos, right?
yep, I keep and breed mealworms,
Hmm.
and I breed dubia roaches and I buy crickets. I also have to buy mealworms too, but I breed them that way. I always have babies, so
Okay.
that for my young fat tails that I'm trying to get on worms pretty early, I have those small to medium mealworms to offer them.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a big help for me to be able to have that little mealworm farm to constantly have rolling. And that's a pretty simple process and doesn't take a whole lot of time consumption once you get it set up. It just
Mhm.
takes a while to get it going as far as like establishment time because there's such a slow lifespan or so slow
Gotcha.
growth rate rather.
Yeah. Now with with the mealworms that I keep, yeah, obviously they come to you and they look a certain way. The guy that I get them from, I actually believe that he keeps them on a specific oat, which they come to me looking nice. But I mean, if you've ever gut loaded and then hydrated right after gut loading, you've noticed that hydration's a gut loading too. But you've noticed that, like how like rich and plump and like silky they look. Have you noticed that
Yep. Oh
mealworms?
yeah, and they weigh twice as much too. If you pick up a
Yeah,
handful of them, you can feel how much heavier they are.
yeah,
So
and
it goes without saying that it's
yeah,
better for you get more nutrients across.
it's 100% frowned upon, but after I'm done gut loading like a bunch of mealworms, I love like sticking my hand in there and picking them up and looking at them and just seeing kind of like, look, I don't know, I'm about to feed this to something, so I don't want to just stare at it, but they look good.
Right?
I'm not going to eat it, but you never know. Um, so they say like dark leafy greens are good to give them. I know that you keep predominantly now African fat tails, and there's not much of a difference between Leo gut loading and African fat tails when it comes to the worms, but I guess the hydration is a factor that increases. Is that accurate?
No, I mean, I would say that as far as bug care and gut loading process, it's pretty much the same across the board for most species, unless you have something that's real specific as far as nutritional requirements. Like some, like micro geckos can't have certain, they have like low tolerances of some vitamins and stuff like that.
Okay.
Uh, which I don't know specifics about. I just remember hearing that on a podcast I was listening to by somebody that did know what the hell they were talking about on the micro gecko side of things. But
Gotcha.
as far as like Leos and fat tails and most of your average insectivores, bearded dragons, anything of the norm that I can think of, you would have a pretty straightforward approach for your gut loading, and that's just a high nutrition dry chow that's mostly grain protein, um,
Mhm.
and then a fresh veggie for the moisture source is what I go with. Um,
Okay.
I use dark leafy greens, kale, collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, bok choy. All of those are great. I tell people to stay away from spinach because it
Yeah.
inhibits calcium absorption.
Yep.
And, like straight up iceberg lettuce is just water. Regular potatoes are just water. Um, Stay away from like high sugar, like fruits and stuff like that. And citrus, you only want to give to your breeder bugs, not your feeder bugs, because high citrus amounts can build up and cause issues in your reptiles over time.
It's interesting. So you don't do any citrus to the ones you're about to feed off in that case. Okay.
Not at all. Not at all. My citrus only goes to my breeder colony dubia roaches. That's the only ones that get any oranges. But they get a lot of oranges. They get an orange about once a week, but
Yeah.
uh, only to those guys.
I gotcha. We got Race asking if you put anything else besides leafy greens. I think he kind of just touched on that. Now, you say
Yes.
regular potatoes
Yes.
are
So
water. Sweet potatoes, is that where you're probably going with
Sweet
that?
potato sweet potatoes are better nutrients, but you want to go in moderation with those because they also have a lot of sugars. Um, Spaghetti squash, all squash is pretty good, but spaghetti squash has like one of the highest calcium contents of most of any veggies that I know. So I use a
Okay.
lot of spaghetti squash. Carrots are great. I do
Yeah.
not use baby carrots. I'm a big fan of just regular carrots, not necessarily like high end organic stuff, but and the reason is because I have a rabbit that we've had for a long time that my little boy got when he was young,
Mm-hmm.
and it will not eat baby carrots at all. It loves regular carrots, but it won't touch a baby carrot. And I've experimented
There's
and
got to be
put
a reason for
like,
that, right?
well, I have a theory because I've experimented and put a baby carrot and a regular carrot in like a dubia colony,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll consume all of that regular carrot before they even start on the baby carrot. They will eventually eat the baby carrot, so it's not to say that they'll just ignore it, but they'll eat all the other one. And my theory is that they wash those baby carrots in some kind of bleach solution or some kind of solution to
Hmm.
keep them from like I don't know in the processing because from what I understand, baby carrots are made from like all the reject carrots that are all deformed and don't
I didn't
you
know.
know cut the great standard. You know what I mean?
It's
Um,
funny. Baby carrots were put in bags for those, high class humans that
yeah,
they like to pay a lot of extra money for way less food. But
yeah. So anyway, that was a side. Sorry. Um,
yeah.
anyway, I don't like baby carrots. I use regular carrots and spaghetti squash. That's my main go-to veggies that I use all the time. And the spaghetti squash, the carrots, I just either like julienne if I'm giving them to my crickets. That way, it's maximum surface area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the spaghetti squash, I will wash the outside of it in Dawn. Talking about pesticides, Reese. Um, I'll wash the outside in Dawn with just a drop or two of Dawn and then rinse it really, really well. And then a spaghetti squash you want to cut like crossways. I
Okay.
use a bread knife. I use a big bread knife. That's the best thing I've found for it. And they're kind of a pain in the butt to clean, but I cut it crossways and then I clean it out with a spoon, get all the seeds and stuff out, and then I scrape all the meat out with that spoon, and then you end up with a good half inch or so, even more sometimes, of meat that you can't really scrape off. But that's
Okay.
why I wash the outside first because then you can save that rind. You can break it up into pieces and put it in bags, and you can put that whole piece of rind with the meat on it in, say, on top of a mealworm tray
Mm-hmm.
or in your dubia colony or whatever, and they'll eat every little bit of meat off of that rind until it's down to just the paper thin rind, and so you don't have any going to waste at all.
Yeah.
Um, And then same thing with the well, not same thing, but like when I feed bananas, I peel them. If I give bananas to my dubia colonies, I'll peel them completely so that none of that peel is exposed. Because I did have a major die off one time, and I think it might have been because I was putting bananas with peel and might have had something on them. Um,
Okay.
and then with the oranges, I'll do the same thing. I'll wash the outside before I do anything, rinse it really well, and then cut off each end of the orange and just put the whole orange in there with the ends cut off to
Okay.
where the dubia can like consume it from the outside in
It's interesting.
without
Yeah. I mean, when you
without
cook
chance of
with,
pesticides or
when
anything.
you cook with stuff like that, even though when you zest a lemon or an orange or something like that into your food, you always wash it first. So yeah, that makes a lot of
Yep.
sense. Get those pesticides off of there. Um, I did have a question for you. It had to do with now, when I do mine, just to kind of give you my process, I do a dry feed first. I
Hmm.
don't overdo it. I pour it and make sure that they can mix into it really well. I give them a good 24 hours and then I'll come through and I'll sift. I take them outside, sift the frass away, whatever they haven't broken up kind of comes out of there at that point. But 24 hours is usually more than enough time for mealworms to tear apart anything I put in there, especially if I don't overdo it.
Hmm.
Um, when after that I will do typically carrots or, like you said, dark leafy greens of some kind. Again, I don't overdo it. I have overdone it once. I did not know that carrots can become a huge, like, gelatinous, just disgust. I mean, it killed the entire, you couldn't use any of the
Oh yeah.
mealworms, but it turns into like a jello, like a gelatinous, like, disgusting thing, and you can't get it out. So I mean, I tried washing it, I tried sifting it. I ended up just trashing the mealworms and starting over. I was pissed. But yeah, you can overhydrate with, putting too much on top. So kind of like you said earlier, in moderation, that's how I would do it. And then so one of my questions I was wondering is, when you do you do a dry feed and then a hydration, or do you do it all together in one?
So kind of both because I have like a two-stage system for my worms.
Mm,
I have a bedding that I make myself out of oats and dubia chow and a little bit of wheat germ, and I throw little bit of yeast flakes and bee pollen in there. And that's what I keep my mealworms on for the majority of the time for maintenance because that's the cheapest bedding that I have
okay.
on, in my hands. And then I have a higher end gut load that I put them on like just day or two prior to feeding just for a final stage of gut load. And
Okay.
then what I do is I give them minimal veggies when they're on the maintenance bedding, when I'm just
Hmm.
keeping them alive and letting them grow. And then whenever they go on the gut load bedding, I make sure that they have quite a bit more hydration as far as frequency. I'm not putting a whole bunch on top to where it's trapping moisture, but they're in an open 6 quart tub or 15 quart tub, no lid on it at all. That way they have maximum ventilation, plenty of the gut load bedding, and then just worms. And I'm not putting them in there with a bunch of frass. I'm sifting them out from their maintenance bedding,
Yeah.
size separating them, so I have a batch of medium worms and a batch of large worms, both gut loading on the it's called feeder fuel what I use, and
Okay.
then while they're on that, they have strips of carrot, they have piece of green, they have a little piece of squash, depending on what I'm gut loading with heavier that day or that week as far as the hydration portion goes.
Gotcha.
And then whenever I'm ready to feed those worms at the end of the day, I usually put them like on that either the night before or the morning of. And whenever I'm ready to feed those worms off, then I put them back in the sifting tubs that I separate them with, and then I have them dry, gut loaded, separated, ready for feed. And actually, I have those. I have these tubs right here that I use. These are the little
Nice.
square tubs, and I just cut the bottom out of this one
Yeah.
and used some screen on it
Green on it. Yep.
to where I can separate the large mealworms from the medium mealworms.
Hmm.
And then I have another size screen that'll separate the medium from the small. And then I even have these ones with this is the mealworm bags that they send the mealworms in.
Hmm.
I cut that fabric and use it for a false bottom, and that I can use to just separate the frass out from the worms, from even the tiniest worms.
Okay.
And so it'll only let dust through, but you can't leave them in that because they'll eat through that. But the wire one, I can leave them on that overnight if I want to let them separate out really well.
Yeah.
And I'll come back the next day to a good separation of sizes of pretty consistent, only large worms on top. You know what I
Nice.
mean?
You know, it's one of the things I do, which I think is kind of funny, is I usually do everything in a V35 27 quart, tub, and
Hmm.
I'll set it down on the table, and when I'm ready to sift, I'll sift. But if there's still some stuff in there and I can't get it out, whatever, I just tilt it up so it's like slightly up, and then I throw a carrot on the top, and all the mealworms will travel up. I do that when I have enough time and I don't need to feed off right away. But like literally, they'll come up, and then you can just put gloves on, pick them up, and put them in something else. But sifting works too. Yeah, I have the screen things as well, and especially when you need to feed right away. Um, Question I had for you, you obviously keep a lot of insects and a lot of different types of insects for feeding. Have you ever noticed that your Leos or your AFTs turn their nose up at mealworms when you feed the insects something specific?
Mm, not necessarily, not specifically, but I'm sure that's a possibility. But I haven't run into it with my personal experience.
Okay, so pretty much whatever you feed the mealworms, they're gonna, obviously start eating them.
Yeah, from what I mean, unless you do like you were talking about and have them go sour, if you're like
Yeah.
got too much moisture in there, and that's one thing with worms. It's not necessarily just to kind of backtrack. I don't think that it's necessarily that you're overhydrating the worms, and that's what created what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I think that you just created an overhydrated environment for the worms, and they started dying off very rapidly, and so then you had
Mm-hmm.
this excrement coming from the dead worms combined with the liquefying carrot and all that, and it created that gelatinous goo that you were talking about. But
Gotcha.
if you have your worms in enough bedding and not overcrowded, that's something I still deal with today. I'll overcrowd just out of the sake of laziness because I don't have enough bedding made, and I just throw like 10,000. The other day I did it. I put 10,000 worms instead of I usually put like 5,000 per tub,
Yeah.
and I was like, screw it. I'll just put extra bedding, and I put them in the same size tub. I normally put five per,
Yeah.
and I came back the next day and I had like hundreds of pupa because they just freaked out because they were overcrowded, and so they started pupating. And they
Yeah.
weren't even large worms; they were mediums. There's no reason they would have started pupating, but that's what it was: is they were overcrowded. Because as soon as I started separating them out and pulling all those pupa, then they stopped that high rate of pupation, and I was able to use the second half of the worms.
Because
But
they won't eat the pupa. Then nothing you can do will ever make them want to eat that. So,
yeah,
um,
my
it,
turtles will eat the hell out of the pupa.
yeah. So AFTs, I'm not as familiar with. Obviously, they are cricket eaters. I had mine turn their nose up at mealworms when I had mine every time. I mean, there was two of them I could get to eat mealworms regularly, and they actually looked healthier. But
Hmm.
you had to have crickets. Now, crickets typically come with a lot of problems, issues. I don't know, even like they're unclean. Is there a reason why you go to the person you go to, or is there something you maybe do to help with that cleanliness of the crickets?
Yeah, I mean, sourcing is definitely a big factor for sure. You got to try to find the best source you can and the cleanest source you can. Like I said, the guys that I get mine from, or I don't know if I mentioned it here already or not, they're in Houston, only a few hours from me, and they
Mhm.
deliver them to my door, to my shop once every. They're coming today, actually, in a few hours,
Gotcha.
every Tuesday.
Yep.
So that's a big deal, so that you're reducing the stress and getting them from a better, from a clean source. And then the way you keep them is really important. You got to keep them really hydrated and again, well ventilated and not overcrowded. I put
Yeah.
1,000 crickets per big, like 64 quart tub, and they do fine like that. And if you do have a lot of die off, you need to move them to a clean tub. That's something I check pretty much daily in my cricket, you know,
Yeah.
uh, inven- inventory or whatever you want to call it. Whenever I have my crickets sitting, just waiting to be gut loaded and waiting to be fed off. Because I don't feed them right away. I'll get them today, and I might feed a few fat tails tonight, but most of them won't be fed until tomorrow after the crickets have gut loaded really well. I'd rather them go a day without food and get a really gut loaded bug a day later
Yep.
than get empty bugs the day of.
I
But
agree with that. That's important too. To
yeah. Um, And as far as like fat tails eating other things, I think there's a couple of factors there. I think a lot of fat tails come from breeders that only feed crickets, and those fat tails never learn how to eat from a bowl.
Okay.
And so I've had success with fat tails that I've gotten from other breeders. Before I used crickets as much as I do, I used to kind of stick to dubia and worms mostly, and I would teach those fat tails how to eat from bowls by removing the hopper legs from crickets and
Okay.
putting them in feeder bowls, the
Gotcha.
escape-proof feeder dishes. That way, the fat tail was seeing something it was familiar with, and you know, and then I
Yeah.
had really good success, probably about 75% success rate with getting geckos that wouldn't eat dubia or worms to eventually eat dubia or worms once I showed them
Yeah.
how to find it in the bowl.
It's hard for
Um,
me to imagine any gecko not wanting to eat a dubia roach, because they're so quick. It's like almost like it triggers them immediately to
I
want
know,
to pounce. But
I know.
um, all right. So my next one for you would be, after all that, right? You've got all of your gut loading done. Your nutrients are in the worms. You're ready to feed them off. How important at that point would you say dusting? Dusting your crickets, dusting your mealworms or other feeders. How important would you say that is?
Super important, but actually, Joe, I want to go over something else real quick before we dive into supplementation
Cool.
because I think it's another very overlooked thing is protecting yourself when you're messing with these bugs.
Okay.
We hear all the time about breeders getting out because of worm allergy or whatever. Well, and then you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, I'm allergic and I'm allergic," but
Yeah.
here's the deal: we're all allergic to something that we're not supposed to be exposed to, and we're overexposing ourselves to on a regular basis. And
Okay.
I'm sure most of us, whenever we first started out with just a few geckos, said, "Oh, I'll never get that big. I'll never have that many animals. I'll never be to that point." And so we don't think about protecting ourselves when we're just dealing with 100 worms or 50 worms or something. And
Yeah.
then you get to 1,000 worms and you're still not worried about it. And then next thing you know, you're unpacking 10,000 worms and you're still not protecting yourself. And when I say
Yeah.
protect yourself, I mean protect your lungs. Um,
Mhm.
these guys have a lot of allergen creating dander and dust that they put off that they create, and the food we feed them has a lot of dust that can cause allergens. Their frass can cause a lot of allergens. That their molts can break down and cause a lot of allergens. So it's really important to keep them in a healthy way. And whenever you're doing any kind of extensive messing with them, that you're wearing a respirator, and I mean a real respirator, not like a
Yeah.
little bullcrap mask. I wear the respirators with the pink discs.
Yeah.
That is a full nose and mouth respirator that goes real tight on your head, and and that helps me because I've developed an allergy, and if I
Yeah.
don't wear that whenever I'm doing heavy work with them, I'll have like asthmatic type reactions. And it's
Okay.
serious. Like it can
Yeah.
put me in a bind. So I just wanted to
Definitely. If
mention that
you
because I don't think enough people pay attention to that as they're growing in size and scope. It's really easy to overlook, and then
Yeah.
before you know it, it's biting you in the ass, and you're coming out of your gecko room going, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
So just something to think about. Air quality is really important. I have purifiers I run in my rooms, and just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That's why I do the sifting methods like I do, to where I don't have excess frass
Mhm.
in my mealworm container. I use a dust buster that's dedicated to my mealworms to vacuum up all the molts from on top of them,
Okay.
instead of just letting them exist in there and get broke down any further, or instead of going outside and blowing them with an air hose. I rather use a high quality HEPA filter dust buster to
Yeah.
vacuum all that up. If you just get, oh, look at there, perfect timing.
Perfect
If you
timing.
just get if you just above the mealworms and start higher and come down until you see molt starting to come up,
Yeah.
and then just gradually just do a grid pattern over that mealworm bin,
Yeah.
and you'll get 75% of the molts picked up out of there
Yep.
on the first pass. And then give them some time, because as the mealworms are constantly trying to get out of the light, they're pushing the molts up. That's why the molts are constantly sitting on top, because they're lighter and they're getting moved around. So give it some time and then come back with another pass, and
Yeah.
then before you know it, you'll have 90% of the molts out of there.
Dude, I got
And
something
another,
like a
another
2.5 foot leaf blower. I actually will just take the big, V35 tubs outside, set them on the ground, and
Yep.
stand back and just kind of blow air at them. Not direct. I don't want to blow them out of the tub, but I just blow the air at them, and they're far away from me. It pushes far
Right.
enough, because it's a powerful tool, and all that. You
Yeah.
just let them sit there and shove it to the top, and it literally some of it'll push to the edge, but you could walk over and just kind of tap it, and it'll come out. But it's interesting that you do that.
Yeah.
I do that as well, because if you
And then,
get a lot
and
of
then
that
when your
shed,
asthmatic neighbor comes out from downwind and catches a breath
yeah,
of it, he's gonna be in the
he's like,
hospital.
"What have you done?"
I'm just
And you're
playing.
like, "Bro, I'm sorry." You're like, come look in this room, bro. Like, there's a lot of stuff. But no, the sheds, they
Hey,
won't eat
side
the
note about
worms.
molts. If you're not seeing molts,
Yeah,
well, here's the thing. If you're not seeing molts in your worms, that means you don't have any bedding left in there and they're just on frass, because they
yeah,
won't eat the molts until they don't have any food to eat. And then once they don't have any food to eat, they'll start breaking down and consuming the molts, which
yeah.
obviously isn't nutritious at all for them. So,
Right.
like whenever I get to a batch of mealworms and I don't have any molts to vacuum, that tells me that I need to sift those out, get rid of that frass, and
Mhm.
put that batch of mealworms on some new bedding. And that's one way
Gotcha.
that I reduce the overall amount of frass dust I have in my room. Um,
Okay.
and I do all that processing outside, not in my room. Don't sit
Correct.
there and dump mealworms back and forth in your
Mhm.
gecko room, thinking I'm okay because I have a mask on, because all that dust is
Yep.
gonna sit and accumulate in your room. Take that shit outside and
Yep.
do that with the mask on, in a nice area that's well ventilated, to where you're not contaminating things with all this dust. It's a real problem, guys. Don't
Yep.
don't sleep on this.
No, I never transfer mealworms from one tub to the other indoors. Also, the frass is good for your,
Hmm.
the lawn. It's not going to hurt it at all. It's just going to help it
Yep.
a little bit, anyways. I've noticed
I
that
save it
I
and
go to the
make
very edge, and when I do that,
yep.
that section of grass is always a lot healthier than the rest of the yard. But I
Hmm.
want to do it as far
It's
from my house as
fertilizer.
possible, So yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And I won't feed off unless I've obviously every gut load I'll do dry, then obviously your hydration gut load. I sift between each one, and I sift right before feedings each time. Um, One of the things I noticed too about the sheds is they get real crinkly and in there, and that you can't really. It's harder to get them out if you've let it get to the point where they start eating it. So that's
And if you have more moisture in there than you want. If it's real dry, they'll vacuum right up.
yep.
But if the environment is a little wetter than ideal, then they're going to be heavier and they're not going to vacuum up as easily whenever you're doing that
Yeah.
dustbuster method.
Do you dust? You do the dustbuster outdoors? I'm assuming.
No, that I actually do inside, because it's a high quality HEPA dustbuster. It's got a HEPA filter
Okay.
in it, and it's dedicated just to that. Now, when I empty that dustbuster, that's done outside. I go
Okay.
empty that container and dust it out real good, shake it out real good, put it all back together outside. I turn it on outside so that any dust that I got like in
Mhm.
between the filters gets pushed out outside, and then I have it ready for use again for the
All right.
next time.
Gotcha. Now, getting back to it, after all of this, right? Keeping your feeders healthy and ready to, keep your animals healthy. Dusting. You're feeding them off now. How important would you say dusting and
Oh yeah.
supplementing is to
Very
the
important.
process?
No matter how much gut loading we do, so here's the way I look at it. As much as we gut load, we could
Mhm.
probably get away without doing much supplementation in reality.
Yep.
Um, However, I would rather them have more than they need and it just pass through their body and it be me wasting money on supplements, than they not have enough and suffer any detriment due to lack of supplementation.
Yeah.
Because, and I've talked with my vet at length about this, my exotics vet, who's one of my really good friends.
Okay.
Um, and according to him, they're not much different than us in the fact that if they have too much of something, it's just going to pass through their system and they're going to piss it out, shit it out. It's not something that's going to build up and cause major issues,
Okay.
including the whole D3 myth, controversy, topic, whatever. I don't think there's been any recorded cases of D3 overdose in a nocturnal animal in decades. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think maybe that might have been a thing with earlier supplementation that wasn't as much of like controlled and trace amounts of certain things.
Mm.
Maybe there was some inconsistencies there whenever they were first coming out with all this stuff. But the supplements we have today, um, now I'm not talking about a diurnal species right now when I say there's,
Yep.
you know, D3 overdose is not a thing. If you're overdoing D3 in a diurnal species that is also basking in high in UVB every day, then yes, that there's definitely what is it? I forget what the term is. Hypervitamosis or whatever, so
Yeah.
some kind of thing that they can get. Um, I'm not that smart, guys. Sorry, I'm just an oil field hand. Um, but anyway, that's my take on that. Is I'd rather give them more than they need and them just waste, you know, it just be wasted than not give them enough and they suffer in any way.
I
So
gotcha.
that's how I practice it.
Cool. My last
And I
take on
use
this
it.
would be to ask you, when do when is a good and responsible time to say, hey, these feeders are no longer any good. I know I'm going to lose a little bit of money, but they're out of here. I'm going to get rid of them.
As far as like shelf life of feeders,
Yeah, they don't look good enough anymore. There's not really much you can do about them. Obviously, with mealworms, they can pupate. You can keep too many of them in the fridge. They might, not last as
oh
long,
well,
whatever.
so that's a good note. Talking about keeping them in the fridge. I honestly don't like keeping mealworms in the fridge. I think it's too cold. I think that they go dormant and you get more of that hot, over moist environment that I was talking about. I
Yep.
prefer keeping them in like a red wine setting wine cooler. I have one dedicated to that, and that's at about 55 degrees. And
Okay.
that lets them slow their growth rate dramatically so they're not pupating as quickly. However, they're still active and they're still eating. You can still throw a piece of carrot in there and they'll consume it. And
Okay.
then you can take them out and they'll get even more active at room temp. So what I do is that if I have excess mealworms, I'll put half of them in the wine cooler at 55 degrees and I'll keep the other half at room temp so that those will grow out a little faster to the larger mealworm that I want to feed with. And then as far as pupation goes, I breed mealworms, so pupating doesn't kill me. I just use them to expand my breeder production. Um,
That's a man. I have like
so,
7 wine coolers in my garage because I constantly
dude,
convert
it's
them to
perfect temp.
incubators.
It's
So
perfect temp. Once you put them in a wine cooler, you will be like, why did I ever put them in a fridge? They'll come out
gotcha.
feel so much healthier whenever you're going to start the gut loading process because they're in there still eating. And
Okay.
then as far as like going bad, I don't really experience that with the way that I keep them. If you keep them on the right fresh bedding and you don't let them just sit on frass, they're going to
Yeah.
stay in good condition. And I'm constantly plucking dead ones out. That's a daily thing. When I pull my
Yeah.
batch of mealworms out, I'll pluck dead ones out as soon as I see them. That way it's not getting that sour, rancid state at all. So that's my answer to that is I just make sure that that doesn't
Yeah.
really take happen,
Yeah.
or take hold rather. And then with my dubia roaches, same thing. I just keep them in good environments, and they just keep growing as far as life shelf life. Crickets, obviously, you have a lifespan of them,
Very
but
short
if you
one.
keep them
Very
if you
short
keep
one.
them really hydrated, it's a lot longer lifespan than people realize. A lot of people lose them and they're like, oh, they don't live very long, but it's because they're actually not keeping them properly. So just same thing. Keep them hydrated, keep them well ventilated, keep them plenty of stuff to climb on so they're not climbing on all over each other. Um,
Yeah.
and keep them cool as far as the mealworms go. People also don't realize how much heat a batch of mealworms generates just through friction, just from climbing all over each other. If you take a temp gun and hold it on mealworms in a 75-degree room, that batch of mealworms is going to be like 90 degrees.
Gotcha. Man, I feel like I couldn't have had a better person on to talk about this with. This is going to help a lot of people. Real quick, you mentioned the brand that you use to gut load your mealworms. Did you want to show the bag and talk about it?
Yeah, man.
Bring mine
These
up.
guys, it's called Feeder Fuel. This is made by some friends of mine that are chameleon breeders. I've been using it for I don't know about 6 months or so now, and
Mm,
I've had pretty good success with it. Reddy's Rainforest is who makes it.
okay.
Um, it's made with all kind of great stuff: alfalfa, Timothy hay, orchard grass, soybeans, dandelion root, dandelion leaves. He gets all the ingredients in bulk and then he makes it himself. He
Okay.
grinds it all up and makes it himself. and the bugs are really responding well to it. The geckos seem really healthy. I'm not having to feed really as much quantity, I feel like, of bugs as I used to, as far as like worms per gecko.
Okay.
Um, so I'm
Yeah.
really happy with that. And then fresh veggies, like I said, carrots, spaghetti
Yeah.
squash, that's my go-tos.
I'm
And
gonna
then dark
I'm
leafy
gonna switch
greens.
up to yours because I've been using obviously chickpea. I don't know if you've ever done starter growth non-medicated, but I've been using
Yeah,
this for a little bit for the dry stuff. It's got a lot of different things in it. And it's been working out, but I feel like once they get a little bit older, they don't really, respond well to the mealworms themselves on it. But I mean, I could always be wrong. I'm gonna try yours out. I'm actually, as soon as we get off here, I'm gonna buy a bunch of that stuff and see what happens. But
well, make sure you
um,
tell him we sent you so that he'll keep hooking me up with my with my wholesale discount.
I will. I'll tell him you
um,
sent me, man. And everybody else, make sure that if you go grab some of that, you definitely let them know that Seth over at Huffs Herps sent you. Uh, Other than that, man, I don't really have anything else. If you do, please, by all means, this is the moment. But dude, do you have anything
Man,
else
we
you want to
covered a
talk about?
lot. I mean, we could always do another one on like specifically the breeding aspects of the bugs because I'm sure a lot of
Sure.
people are interested in learning more about that. That's a whole topic on its own.
We'll put that together, man. That sounds
And I've
awesome.
got some resources I can pass on to that as well. Like I got a buddy of mine, actually, I'll throw that out there right now. SouthTexasDragons.com. That's who taught me how to breed dubia, and he's
Okay.
got an amazing breakdown on his website that if you follow it, you'll have success. And so
Okay.
that's a great resource I give people all the time at the expos. I'll give him my card as they're, buying breeder dubia roaches to start their own colony with.
Okay.
Um, and then, so that's another thing we could do is maybe dive into that one time.
I would love
Um,
that, man. Actually, we'll put that together and get back on here soon.
sure.
Well, thanks for coming on and talking to everybody. Man, I feel like we got a lot of information here for folks to be able to successfully gut load their mealworms. For everybody who doesn't know, obviously, That Gecks Out is a new podcast that's going to be sporadically dropping on the Geckoverse channel. It's going to be topic driven and very informal. But Seth, man, Huff's Herbs, if you're not following them already, you should be. And everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yes, sir.